Tell me, before I begin my story, where in the world are you listening from? What hour wraps around you now? Is it dawn with its pale breath against your window, or night, heavy and fragrant like the silk curtains of my old chambers? I ask because I need to imagine you. When I lived, there was no electricity. Our nights were shaped by the trembling glow of oil lamps, their flames soft as whispered secrets. Tell me what lights your darkness now. A screen? A bulb? Or the moon, unchanged, watching you as it once watched me? And another question. In my time, the law bent beneath the weight of emperors, and a woman's voice was often dismissed like a falling leaf. How is it where you live? Does your country listen to the voices of women, or do they still have to carve their names into stone, the way I did? When I traveled, I rode in lacquered carriages pulled by horses, whose hooves rang like bells across the stone roads of Chang'an. What carries you now from place to place? Engines of fire and steel, wheels humming over endless highways, or the quiet steps of your own feet when you seek peace? And tell me, when conflict rises in your world, how do you confront it? With words, with laws, or with the cold machinery of modern war? I ask because I want you close. I want your breath, your time, your world to sit beside mine, so that when I speak, you do not hear an ancient empress, but a woman, alive, aware, remembering. Now, come with me. Let me take you back to the days when the moon over Chang'an was red like a lacquered shield, and the river below the palace walls murmured secrets for those brave enough to listen. Let me take you to the moment when I, a young girl of mere 14 summers, entered the dragon court for the first time and felt the weight of destiny coil around my ankles like a living serpent. But before we walk into the heart of my life, breathe with me for a moment. Feel the silk of time loosen. Let the world around you soften. Let the centuries fold like the petals of a lotus, because now you are stepping into my memory, and I will tell you everything. I was not born in a palace. Before the jade pillars and the dragon banners, before the carved lions that guarded the steps to the throne, there was the dust of my father's courtyard, the scent of ink and paper, and the sound of horses passing beyond our gate. My name, when it was still small and harmless, was Wu Zhao, a girl's name light as a brushstroke. I remember the mornings of my childhood as a gentle gray, the kind of light that slips shyly through lattice windows and paints slow patterns on wooden floors. My father was a man of letters and trade, not a great lord, not a farmer, but something in between. He dealt in horses and timber, in paper and silk, and he moved with an ease that said he understood how fragile fortune is. From him, I learned to listen more than I spoke. From my mother, I learned how to watch. She was not a beauty legendary enough to be sung about, but there was something in the way she held herself that made the room look smaller beside her when guests visited. Her smile was measured, like someone weighing a coin in her hand, testing its worth. It was she who first looked at me not as a child, but as a possibility. Zhao, she said once, as she combed my hair beneath the shade of the old apricot tree. Do you know what a woman's greatest weapon is? I, who had been watching an ant struggle up the curve of a fallen petal, answered with the foolish certainty of youth. Her beauty. She laughed quietly, the sound low and amused. Beauty is a mask, she said, drawing the comb slowly through my hair so that it whispered. It fades, it cracks, it is wiped away with tears. No, little one, a woman's greatest weapon is her mind, but only if she learns to use it in silence. At the time, I did not understand. I only knew that when my mother moved through our home, men straightened, servants lowered their eyes, and even my father sometimes paused in the middle of a sentence to listen to the silence she left behind. I wanted that, not her face, not her hands, but that invisible gravity. So I practiced. I watched everyone. I listened at doors I was not meant to stand near. I pretended to play with silk ribbons by the window, while officials came and went from my father's study, their voices carried in broken threads through the carved wood. I learned the timbre of anger in a man's throat, a slight tremor of fear when he spoke of taxes or war. I learned the flattery that rose like incense whenever the name of the emperor was mentioned. The emperor, to me, he was a legend before he was a man, the son of heaven, the dragon who ruled from Chang'an. I had never seen his face, yet his shadow stretched all the way to our modest home, curling around our meals, pressing its weight into the conversations of adults who thought I was not listening, but I was. I listened when my father's guests spoke of the capital, of Chang'an, whose streets were said to be rivers of people flowing between markets, bright with color and noise. I listened when they spoke of the palace, a labyrinth of courtyards and gilded halls, where thousands of souls lived and schemed and vanished. And I listened when they spoke of the inner court, of the women, a sea of silk. One man called it, with a smirk, each wave hoping to reflect the moon. The moon was the emperor. I remember turning that image over in my mind as I lay awake at night, staring at the faint silhouette of the window lattice. An ocean of women, each fabric different, each fragrance unique, all of them lifting their faces toward one distant shining point. At that time, I thought I might drown there. If I were ever thrown into such a sea, I did not yet know that I was not made to drown. I was made to rise. When I was around 13, the air in our house changed. You may not have lived in a home where politics is like the weather, shifting silently, felt first in the way your elders fall quiet when certain names are spoken. In my world, when officials rose and fell, you could feel it in the tension of the servants' shoulders, in the careful way the rise was measured. One morning, I woke before the sun. The house was not yet fully alive, but I heard my parents whispering in the room beyond the thin wall. An order from the court, my father was saying. His voice was calm, but it wore a tightness I did not recognize. Is this a blessing? My mother asked softly. or a knife wrapped in silk. I remember sitting up, bare feet on the cool floor, heartbeat loud in my chest. I crept to the door, pressing my ear against the wood. They are selecting girls, my father replied, to be sent to the palace as attendants, as concubines, for His Majesty's service. Families of good standing are expected to offer daughters. It is an honor. A silence followed, thick, heavy, fluttering like a trapped bird. And they want Zhao, my mother said at last, not as a question, but as a verdict she had seen coming from a distance. I could almost hear my father's shoulders sag. She is clever, he murmured. Quick, too quick. The officials noticed. They said her presence of mind would make her useful in the inner court. Useful, like a tool, like a sword. Behind the door, I did not cry. I simply sat there, feeling my world bend around a new axis. The palace, the sea of silk, the moon, me. Later that day, they called me to my father's study. The room smelled of ink and sandalwood. Scrolls lay rolled and stacked in neat piles. A single shaft of light fell through the high window, illuminating dust motes that drifted slowly as if time itself had grown hesitant. My mother stood near the table, her hands folded so tightly. The knuckles were pale. My father sat, his face carefully composed. Zhao, he said, and my name sounded distant, like it already belonged to another life. You are to go to the palace in Chang'an. You have been chosen to serve in the inner court of His Majesty, Emperor Taizong. Chosen, as if I had no say, as if the sky had simply changed color, and I was supposed to pretend it had always been that way. I lowered my eyes, because a daughter was meant to be obedient. But something in me, a thin, bright wire, tightened. I understand, Father, I said. My voice did not tremble. My mother's gaze sharpened. She knew me too well. When he dismissed me, she followed me to the women's quarters. The moment the door slid closed, her composure cracked just enough for me to glimpse the tumult beneath. You are not a lamb, she said quietly, taking my face in her hands. Do not go there thinking you are being led to slaughter. What should I think then? I asked, searching her eyes. She exhaled slowly, her thumbs brushing my cheeks. Think, she said, that you are being sent into the mouth of a dragon. Some people are devoured, others learn to ride its back. I remember the hairs on my arms rising. Can a girl ride a dragon? I whispered. Her lips curved faintly. A girl, she said, can become anything the world is too blind to imagine. Then she set about preparing me to leave, not simply with clothes and hairpins, but with the subtle armor of her teachings. Listen before you speak, she instructed. Observe how people stand, not just what they say. Remember who looks at whom when a name is mentioned. In the palace, walls have ears, but more importantly, eyes have walls. You must learn to see through them. She taught me how to lower my gaze without lowering my power, how to smile in a way that revealed nothing, how to hide my thoughts behind a gentle, untroubled expression. Modesty will be your veil, she said. Do not tear it too soon. On the night before my departure, I did not sleep. Instead, I went out into the small courtyard alone. The sky above our home was not yet the wide, crowded sky of Chang'an. It was quieter, sprinkled with a modest scattering of stars. I looked up and whispered questions, like prayers, not to any particular god, but to whatever force had decided that my life would be pulled toward the capital's burning heart. If you had been there, listening beside me, I might have asked you, in your world, when a young girl is taken from her home and sent into the machinery of power, what do you call it? Opportunity? Sacrifice? Or something darker? Do they tell her it is an honor, the way they told me? Do they dress it in words of gold to hide the teeth beneath? In my time, we had no easy names for such things. We wrapped them in duty and fate. I wrapped them in silence and determination. The journey to Chang'an felt like traveling from one lifetime into another. Our caravan of carriages and riders moved steadily along packed roads, passing villages that thinned out as we drew nearer to the capital. The air grew different, busier, thicker, with a sense of many lives pressed close together. I shared a carriage with two other girls, also being sent to the palace. One cried quietly into her sleeves for most of the journey. Another stared fixedly at the passing landscape, as though memorizing the world she did not expect to see again. I, too, looked out, but not to say goodbye. I was studying. Every village, every bridge, every watchtower was a thread in the tapestry of the emperor's domain. If I was going to enter the heart of this empire, I wanted to know the shape of its limbs. Sometimes, at night, when we stopped at a way station and the world fell silent around us, I would lie awake and imagine the palace. I had heard so many descriptions that it seemed already to exist in my mind. A place of impossible scale where corridors ran like rivers and courtyards bloomed like hidden gardens. I imagined the women too, all that silk, all those painted faces, the whispers, the rivalry, the fragile alliances woven behind screens, and somewhere far above them, the emperor, the dragon upon his throne. I wondered if he ever felt lonely. Power looks heavy, even from a distance. Up close, it crashes. I did not yet know how much of that weight would one day rest upon my own shoulders. The first glimpse of Chang'an stole the breath from my chest. From a rise in the road, the city unfurled below us, like a scroll painting come to life. Walls high and imposing, gates like the mouths of enormous beasts, roofs layered and tiled with glazed ceramics that caught the light like scales. Even from afar, I could feel its hum, the murmur of countless people living, arguing, trading, scheming. It was like standing at the edge of an ocean and hearing the roar of the waves. As we drew closer, the sounds sharpened. Vendors called out their wares in musical rhythms. Children laughed and chased each other through alleys. The clatter of ox carts and horses' hooves on stone merged with the distant echo of temple bells. My carriage curtain was drawn back just enough for me to see without being seen. I drank in every detail, the faces, the colors, the way people stepped aside at the sight of the palace guards, eyes dropping, backs bending, fear and reverence woven into the same bow. And then, beyond the city's beating heart, I saw it, the palace, the dragon court. It rose above Chang'an like a second city, crafted not from ordinary stone and wood, but from symbols. Every pillar, every roofline, every gate said, "This is where heaven touches earth." As our carriage passed through the outer gates, my pulse slowed instead of quickening. Some would have called that calmness courage. In truth, it was something colder. It was the feeling of stepping onto a path that I sensed I would never truly leave. We were taken first to a waiting hall, a large chamber with high ceilings, painted in reds and golds that glowed in the filtered light. There, dozens of girls like me sat in neat rows, their best garments carefully arranged, their hair adorned with whatever finery their families could afford. The air was thick with the mixed scents of perfume and anxiety. Some girls whispered to each other, voices shaking. Others sat very still, eyes distant, retreating into themselves. I did not speak. I watched. Officials moved through the hall, scribes at their side with brushes poised. Every now and then, one would pause before a girl, question her lineage, her age, her skills, music, poetry, calligraphy, dance. I listened to every answer, every response, learning what pleased them, what made their brows crease in faint displeasure. When an official finally stopped before me, I was ready. "Name?" he asked, not unkindly, but brisk, like a man counting coins. "Wu Zhao," I answered, bowing with a precise angle. I had practiced under my mother's eye. "Family." I recited my father's name, his modest titles, our place of origin. He nodded, brush scratching softly as the scribe recorded. "Talents?" he asked. I could have listed them all at once, but I forced myself to speak slowly, as though I did not consider them extraordinary. "I can read and write," I said. "I have studied poetry. I am skilled in playing the pipa. I can copy sutras with a steady hand. I have some small ability in painting." His eyes flicked up at that. "I learned one," he murmured, almost to himself. I lowered my gaze, but inside, I tucked the phrase away like a jewel. He moved on, yet I knew something had shifted. A few hours later, when decisions were announced, my name was listed among those chosen for direct service within the emperor's inner quarters. Some girls were assigned to lesser roles far from the central halls. Some were sent away entirely, faces pale with relief or devastation. It was hard to tell which. I, who had never asked for this fate, found myself being led deeper into the palace. Each step I took echoed through the corridors of my future. When at last I was brought to the threshold of the women's quarters, the air itself felt different, softer, heavier, perfumed with flowers and something more elusive, the bittersweet scent of controlled desperation. women's laughter drifted from somewhere beyond the screens, bright and tinkling, but beneath it lay the low rumble of a constant, unseen struggle. The older attendant, who guided us, paused and turned to address the small group of newcomers. Her face was lined, but her eyes were sharp and hard as polished stone. "You are now part of the inner court," she said, her voice smooth but edged. "Some of you will serve as attendants. Some may, in time, catch His Majesty's eye. Remember this. Every gesture, every word, every glance carries weight. Here, one misstep can send you back to the dust you came from. One lucky whisper of silk can raise you to heights you cannot yet conceive." The other girls shifted uneasily. I stood very still inside my chest. That thin, bright wire pulled tighter, not with fear, with resolve. You, listening to me now, in your own world, may find this cruel. Perhaps where you live, girls are told they can choose their own path, that they may become what they wish by the strength of their will alone. In my world, we were given paths and told to walk them gracefully. But here is a secret. Even on a path laid down by others, you can decide how far you will go. You can decide whether you will bow your head or raise it slowly until the sky is forced to make room. As I stepped, at last, through the carved wooden doors into the sea of silk that was the women's court, I made a silent promise to myself. I will not be swallowed. I will learn the tides. I will learn the winds. And one day, I will not simply reflect the moon. I will become it. The first nights in the palace were difficult, not because I was afraid. Fear was familiar to me, something I could fold and hide inside my sleeve, but because the silence of the palace was different from the silence of the world outside. It was a watching silence, a silence with breath, a silence that belonged to walls, that remembered everything. Sometimes I lay awake in my narrow bed, listening to the faint music drifting from distant courtyards, the laughter of concubines who had long ago learned how to gild their sorrow with perfume and pearls. Other nights I heard footsteps just beyond the screens, soft, measured, deliberate, the sound of someone who wanted to be heard by exactly no one. In the daytime, I studied not books, those I already knew. I studied people, faces, postures, the way a woman's smile could sharpen like a blade when her rival walked by, the way attendants lowered their gazes at the sight of a favored consort, the way everyone's voice changed when speaking of him. Emperor Taizong, the dragon on the throne. I did not see him at first. Girls like me were placed in smaller chambers, given duties that kept us far from the central courts. We were expected to learn the rules, the etiquette, the thousand unspoken laws that hung in the air like threads of invisible silk. But even from a distance, his presence filled the palace like thunder, waiting behind a cloud. The first time I heard his footsteps, I did not yet know they were his. I only felt the shift in the air, the subtle straightening of the attendants, the sudden hush that swept through the corridor. Then he appeared, not close, not near enough for me to see clearly, but I saw the outline of his robes, the flash of gold embroidery, the way the guards dropped to their knees, as though gravity itself had doubled. I remember thinking, so this is the man the world calls Heaven's Son. But that thought was fleeting. It was the second sighting, the one that came days later, that changed the direction of my life. It happened in the hall of painted screens. I had been sent there with 2 other young attendants to deliver a tray of scrolls. We walked silently, 3 shadows gliding over polished stone. The hall was enormous. Huge silk screens stood in rows, each painted with mountains, cranes, rivers, clouds, a landscape of dreams. The air smelled faintly of sandalwood and ink. We were halfway through the hall when I sensed movement behind one of the larger screens. A soft shifting of cloth, a quiet exhale. The older girl beside me stiffened. A warning. She lowered her gaze instantly and muttered, "Do not look." So, of course, I looked. Through the thin silk, a silhouette moved. Strong shoulders, a straight spine, hands clasped behind the back, as if contemplating something beyond the painted world. The Emperor. I felt my pulse rise, but not in the way one might expect. It was not fear. It was recognition. I had spent my life watching powerful men from afar, but standing there, the air trembling in the hall, I realized something simple and dangerous. This man was only human, powerful, yes, terrifying, perhaps, but not a god, not a being of smoke and myth, not an untouchable star. A man and man, I knew even then, could be understood if one only cared enough to look closely. He turned suddenly. The others dropped to their knees so quickly, their hairpins rattled. I lowered my head more slowly, because I wanted to memorize the moment, the breath before the world changes. His footsteps approached, steady and sure. They stopped directly before me. For a heartbeat, nobody breathed. Then his voice, calm, resonant, edged with amusement, slid into the silence. "You are new." Not a question, a statement. I kept my gaze lowered, but I felt the weight of his attention, like sunlight on closed eyes. "Yes, Your Majesty," I murmured. "What is your name?" "Wu Zhao." A pause, not long, just enough for him to taste the syllables. "Stand," he said. My bones obeyed before my mind did. I rose slowly, keeping my posture composed, my expression serene. For the first time, I met the gaze of the dragon. His eyes were not cruel, nor were they gentle. They were observant, the eyes of a man who had seen the rise and fall of countless lives and had learned to hide the toll of it. "You are very calm," he said. That was all. No praise, no smile, just an observation. But in that moment, I saw something shift in his gaze, the faintest flicker of interest, like a candle flame leaning toward a draught. He walked past me then, and the moment closed like a door. But some doors never stay closed. Some remain etched in memory as the beginning of everything that follows. After that day, I began to sense a change. I was still insignificant, one girl among many, but I caught the eyes of senior attendants a little more often. My duties shifted subtly, bringing me closer to the inner chambers. Whispers began to move around me, not in hostility, but in curiosity. She is quiet, some said. She is observant, others murmured. She speaks with purpose. All true, but they did not know that I listened even more than I spoke. I listened to the gossip that flowed like water through the women's court. I learned which concubine was favored, which minister had fallen from grace, which alliances were shifting. I learned that words could kill as efficiently as blades. I learned that the smile could betray an army, and slowly, carefully, I began to weave myself into the edges of palace life, not by force, not by seduction, not yet by presence, by awareness, by being exactly what they expected, while quietly becoming something they did not. One afternoon, when the autumn sunlight spilled gold across the courtyard stones, I was summoned by an older court lady, Madame Wei, sharp as vinegar, who had served the palace for decades. I bowed deeply. She gave me a long, assessing look that felt like being peeled open. His Majesty has requested more attendance in the Hall of Literary Grace, she said. They need girls who know how to read. A test, a doorway. I let a small breath escape, soft and controlled. I can read well, madam, I replied. She nodded once. You will go. That hall, filled with scrolls, maps, records, poetry, was one of the emperor's favorite retreats. Women rarely entered it, and never by accident. As she dismissed me, her voice grew softer. Zhao, do not forget where you are. I lifted my eyes a fraction. Where am I, madame? In a place, she said, where every step can become a staircase or a trapdoor. She leaned in slightly. Be very careful which you choose. The Hall of Literary Grace was quieter than any place I had known. Quiet the way snowfall is quiet. Quiet the way breath is quiet when two people stand too close. Scrolls lined the walls in perfect order. Inkstones rested on carved tables. The scent of cedar hung in the air like a memory. I moved between the shelves, dusting, organizing, copying passages when asked. When the emperor entered, I felt his presence. Before I saw him, he did not speak to me that first day. He barely looked at me, but I saw the way his gaze flicked briefly to the characters I had copied. Precise, steady, elegant, not the hand of a frightened girl. The next day he spoke. You copy well, he said. Thank you, Your Majesty. Do you enjoy reading? Yes. What kinds of texts? History, poetry, the teachings of strategy, and the sermons of the old masters. His eyebrow lifted slightly. A curious mix. It helps me understand the world, I said quietly. And do you? He asked. Understand it? Not yet, I answered, but I am learning. There was a pause, a soft moment suspended between us, like a silk thread. Then continue, he said, and just like that, a thread was tied, invisible, fragile, but real. You listening now in your own time may wonder how a single conversation could alter the course of a life. But in the palace, tiny moments were the seeds from which futures grew. A single glance could raise a woman to glory or ruin her. A single word could move armies, and a single spark, unnoticed by most, could grow into a fire that someday consumed the throne itself. In that quiet room of scrolls and dust, I felt something awaken in me, not ambition alone, but possibility, like the first crack of dawn beneath a long, cold night. I did not know yet how much blood such light would someday cost, but I knew one thing: I was no longer drifting. In the sea of silk, I had found a direction, a current, a path, and I would follow it until the world itself had to follow me. I used to believe that emperors were eternal. When I was young and still learning the shadows of the palace, Emperor Taizong seemed carved from the same stone as the mountains painted on the silk screens, immovable, unbreakable, as ancient as the sky. But nothing in the palace lasts forever. Not beauty, not favor, not even a dragon. The first time I saw weakness flicker across his face, I felt the world tilt. It was subtle, a hand that trembled slightly as he lifted a scroll, a breath drawn too carefully, a pause in his stride that lasted a heartbeat longer than before. Nobody spoke of it openly. In the palace, illness was treated like treason. To acknowledge it was to admit that heaven's mandate could falter. But I saw it. I saw it every time I served in the Hall of Literary Grace, every time I poured tea for him, every time I stood nearby while he read reports with a furrow in his brow that had not been there in the years before. He aged like an old cedar tree, not collapsing, but cracking slowly, and as he weakened, the palace sharpened around him. Ministers whispered more boldly, generals maneuvered, concubines rehearsed the tears they would shed when the inevitable came. As for me, I observed, not out of cruelty, not out of ambition, but because truth is a river that never stops flowing, and those who close their eyes are simply swept away. There were nights when he called me, not as a concubine, nor as a servant, but as a presence that steadied the quiet. He never said so directly. Emperors do not explain their needs, but I felt it. Sometimes he asked me to read to him, not love poems, not songs of yearning, but histories of the ancient dynasties or the reflections of old philosophers. He seemed restless in those hours, like a man searching for something he had lost in the labyrinth of his own life. Once, after I finished reading an account of an emperor who ruled wisely but died forgotten, he spoke into the dim lamplight, as if he had forgotten I was in the room. Greatness, he murmured, is a lonely thing, Zhao. I lowered my eyes. Lonelier still, Your Majesty, I said softly, is the greatness that goes unrecognized. He looked at me then, not with desire, not with condescension, but with a kind of surprise, as though hearing something he had not expected. You speak boldly, he said. I bowed my head. Truth moves boldly, Your Majesty. I only lended my voice. A silence stretched between us, delicate, shimmering, dangerous. And then he looked away, but something in him had shifted, and something in me had begun to rise. As months passed, the court became a hive of quiet panic. Every official's eyes shone with calculation. Every noble clan sharpened its claws. The emperor's sons, princes bred for power, circulated like wolves, each measuring the others, each dreaming of the day the dragon throne would be empty. I knew then that I must be careful, not cautious. That was for frightened women who floated wherever fate pushed them. No, I needed to be precise. A single misstep could bury me. A single silence could protect me. A single word could end me. I moved through the palace like a shadow of a shadow, present, watchful, nearly invisible. But invisibility is difficult when the eyes of power have already noticed you. One winter morning, when frost clung to the branches like white silk, I was summoned to the emperor's private chambers. The summons itself was unusual, too urgent, too quiet. When I entered, I saw him sitting alone, wrapped in heavy robes, his breath faintly visible in the cold air. His hair, once dark and thick, had begun to gray. His eyes, sharp as ever, were ringed with fatigue. I had a dream, he said without preamble. His voice was rough, like paper scraped by stone. I knelt before him. What dream? Your Majesty, a phoenix, he said, rising from smoke, not flame smoke, as if it had survived its own burning. He paused. When I awoke, your face was still in my mind. My heartbeat stumbled, but my expression did not change. Dreams are dangerous things in a palace. They carry weight. They shape decisions. They justify punishments and crown futures. I bowed lower. I am unworthy of such a vision, Your Majesty. He studied me for a long time, as though trying to see through the veil of humility into whatever truth lay beneath. You are many things, he said at last. Unworthy is not one of them. It was not love, it was recognition, and recognition is a ladder, a weapon, a mirror, a destiny. But destiny is never gentle. It does not wait for you to be ready. It arrives like a storm, demanding everything. The emperor's illness worsened. Whispers turned to murmurs. Murmurs turned to careful predictions, spoken behind closed doors. Then, one morning heavy with winter fog, the bells began to ring. Slow, deep, relentless, the sound of an empire exhaling. The emperor was dead. Heaven's son had returned to heaven. Death in the palace is never just grief. It is a reordering of the world. With Taizong gone, everything that had been stable became storm-tossed. Favorite concubines were weeping in gilded halls. Nobles were repositioning themselves, like chess pieces seeking safer squares. Princes were preparing to seize what fate promised, and those without protection were swept away like autumn leaves into fire. I was among them. For all his interest, Taizong had not named me in any decree. I was still only a concubine of his court. Tradition was merciless. Concubines of a dead emperor were to be removed from palace life to prevent influence over the new ruler. Some were executed quietly, some were sent far away, but the majority, the ones too young to kill and too insignificant to keep, were sent to Ganye Temple to live the rest of their lives in silent seclusion. I was one of them. The day they shaved my hair was the first day I understood what true humiliation felt like. The palace attendants did it quickly, efficiently, their faces polite masks of indifference. As dog strands fell around me, like broken feathers, I kept my back straight. I did not cry, but inside me, something cracked, not a weakness, a shell, a boundary, a limit. And beyond that crack, I felt myself, cold, luminous, unbroken, watching everything with new eyes. When they placed the coarse robes upon me, when they bound my hands for the journey, as though I might run, I whispered silently to myself, "This will not be the end of me. This is the smoke. I will rise from it." Ganye Temple was quiet. In a way, the palace could never be. The walls exhaled sage and cold stone. The chants of the nuns rose and fell like gentle waves. Some of the girls who came with me accepted their new lives quickly, grateful to escape the venom of the court. Others were broken, their dreams crushed under the weight of a life without identity. I belonged to neither group. I obeyed the rituals. I learned the prayers. I watered the temple gardens and swept the steps and folded robes and burned incense. But inside me, a flame burned, not loud, not destructive, not yet, but steady, enduring, alive. I used the silence of the temple to sharpen myself. I read every scroll I could find. I memorized sutras. I studied the nature of impermanence and of power, and slowly I began to understand something that would guide me for the rest of my life. Power is not given. Power is recognized, and recognition can be shaped. One spring morning, when the apricot blossoms were just beginning to cast pale shadows on the temple walls, a visitor arrived. The bells rang softly, the courtyard filled with murmurs. When I stepped outside, my breath caught. He was there, Li Zhi, Prince Gaozong, son of Taizong, now emperor. He was not alone. Ministers and attendants flanked him, but his eyes, his gentle, thoughtful eyes, searched the courtyard until they found me. And in that moment, I understood a truth as clear as sunlight on wet stone. He had not come for prayer. He had come for me. The world tilted again, but this time it tilted in my direction. He approached slowly, as though each step carried years of memory. "Zhao," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, yet resonant enough to fill the world. "My emperor," I murmured, bowing, though inside me the smoke of the phoenix shifted, stirring its wings. "You should not be here," he said softly. "I go where I am sent. You were sent wrongly." He studied my face, the shaved scalp, beneath the linen veil, the plain robes, the serenity I had learned but not embraced. You do not belong to a life of silence, he said, almost grieving the words. Then he said the one thing that shattered the stillness of the temple. Like a bell struck too hard, I will bring you back. Not a promise, a declaration, like a man reclaiming what had always been his, in spirit, even before it was his in law. The ministers protested. The nuns bowed in distress. The air shimmered with shock, but I knew, as I looked into his earnest, unguarded gaze, that the smoke around me had finally met its spark. When I left the temple, the apricot blossoms fell behind me in a quiet rain. My past life, the girl who entered the palace in fear, the concubine who watched an emperor fade, the young woman cast aside to a life of prayer, fell away with them. Ahead of me lay the palace once more, not as a prison, not as a labyrinth, but as a battlefield, a throne room, a future, and I walked toward it with a slow, steady grace of someone who had risen from their own ashes. You, listening to me now, with your electricity and your cities and your machines that move faster than any carriage I ever knew, tell me, in your world, when someone is cast down, how do they rise again? With help, with luck, with fury, with quiet, or like me, do they rise from smoke and become something no one expected? When I returned to the palace, I did not return as the girl who had left it. The air tasted different to me. The floors beneath my feet, polished smooth by decades of footsteps, felt like familiar terrain. But I was not the same traveler. I walked through the gates with a shaved head beneath a silk veil, my plain temple robes replaced with garments chosen by Emperor Gaozong himself. Some courtiers stared as though I had risen from a grave. Some whispered blessings, most whispered fear. For a woman to be returned from the temple, for a woman to be reclaimed by an emperor, for a woman with no powerful clan behind her, to step back into the inner court. It was unnatural, unacceptable, unpredictable, and unpredictable women are the most dangerous of all. When I saw Li Zhi Gaozong now, in his new throne hall, my breath caught for reasons I did not yet dare examine. He had aged in the way that gentlemen age when the world demands too much of them. His features were still soft, his voice calm, but his eyes carried the weight of a crown that had come too soon. He dismissed his ministers, walked toward me, and paused as though uncertain where memory ended and reality began. Jiao, he said quietly. I bowed, but only slightly. He noticed. You have not changed, he murmured. He was wrong. I had changed more than he could imagine. It is I who thank you, Your Majesty, I said, my voice steady as river stone. You have restored what was taken from me. He searched my face. I have restored only what should never have been lost. A fragile truth hung between us, the kind of truth that can crown a woman or kill her. He reached out, slowly, as though touching something sacred. You belonged here, he said. You always did. The words warmed me. but they also warned me. Belonging is a promise, power is a challenge, and I knew which one would shape my future. The court, of course, reacted like a nest of startled birds. Rumors hatched faster than logic. She bewitched him. She returned from the temple with spirits at her back. She was never meant to rise. She will be crushed by the clans. She is only a concubine, and the concubines disappear. Let them whisper. I had lived among whispers all my life. I knew their weight. I knew their weakness. A whisper is only dangerous when those who hear it believe they have no voice of their own. I, however, had found my voice in the silence of Ganye Temple. Now I intended to use it. The first threat came, unsurprisingly, from the Empress. Empress Wang, a soft-spoken woman with delicate manners and a brittle smile that crumbled under pressure. She was polite to me at first, her tone honeyed, her gestures warm, her words laced with cautious curiosity. But I saw the fear in her eyes, like a caged animal. She was Empress in name, but her place in the Emperor's heart had withered long ago, and when I returned, younger, sharper, burning quietly, her world trembled one evening as moonlight spilled through the lattice windows like molten silver. She summoned me. She dismissed her attendants and invited me to sit. Her smile was fragile porcelain, her voice gentle. Lady Wu, she began, folding her hands too carefully. You must understand how unsettling your return has been for many, she said. Not for her. I bowed my head just enough to avoid disrespect. I understand, Your Majesty. Her fingers tightened, a crack in her serene mask. You must know your place. There it was, the truth behind the courtesy. My place, I repeated softly, as though contemplating a riddle. Yes, she said, relieved. As long as you remain content with your position, there is no reason for tension in the court. Her relief was premature. The palace air shifted around us, a subtle tightening, a faint coil of unseen power. I lifted my eyes to hers, slowly, deliberately, precisely. My position, I said gently, has never been defined by others. A flicker of shock crossed her face. I serve His Majesty, I continued, and where I serve him is where I belong. Her breath caught. In that instant, I knew two things. Empress Wang had just recognized me as a true threat, and I had just begun my ascent. It did not take long for Consort Xiao, the second favorite of Gaozong, to join the quiet war. She was beautiful like a carved jade vase, delicate, symmetrical, empty. Her smile was sharper than Wang's, and her ambition more visible. She approached me one morning as I walked in the Emperor's private garden. So, this is the famous Lady Wu, she said sweetly, though the venom dripped easily through her tone. I expected someone more humble. I turned to face her fully. She didn't like that. She had expected me to bow. You expected many things, I said quietly. Most of them, I think, will disappoint you. Her fan snapped shut like a guillotine. You will learn, she hissed softly, that this palace has no mercy. I stepped closer, so close she had to lift her chin to keep from stepping back. Mercy, I murmured, is a luxury for those who fear losing. Her eyes widened. Just a breath, just enough. She understood then. They both did. Wang, Xiao, they had underestimated me. They would not again. But knowledge alone does not topple empresses. Position does. Narrative does. History does. Chance does. And chance, like fate, has a strange sense of timing. The emperor became ill, not like Taizong, not a slow fading, but sudden, sharp, debilitating. His headaches worsened, his vision blurred. He struggled to stand without gripping the arm of a chair. The palace plunged into a tense half-silence, waiting, watching, fearing, and I stayed by his side, not as a schemer, not as an opportunist, but as someone who understood him in ways neither Wang nor Xiao ever had. He trusted me, he confided in me, he relied on me, and trust is the most dangerous currency in a palace. One night, as the candles burned low and his breath came shallow, he whispered, Zhao, I need someone who can rule. If I cannot, I bowed my head, my heart beat heavy, deep. Your Majesty, you have ministers, princes, an empress. His fingers tightened weakly around mine. They have their clans behind them, and their ambitions in front of them. But you have only yourself, a pause, a long, trembling breath, and that, he said, makes you the only one I can trust. The world narrowed to a point, and from that point, a new path opened, a path no woman had ever walked before, a path that will carry me from concubine to empress to emperor. But ascents are not made of promises. They are made of blood, and blood was coming. The first blow fell on Empress Wang, a small scandal, a whisper, a rumor planted in the right ear at the right time. I did not speak it, but I did not stop it. Wang was accused of interfering in the emperor's decisions. Her clan failed to shield her. Her political strength shattered like a dropped porcelain bowl. Then came Consort Xiao, a quieter fall, wrapped in silk and shame. She was caught in a lie, a subtle lie, but a fatal one, about the emperor's health. Her clan distanced itself. Her influence evaporated. I did not destroy them. They destroyed themselves. I simply allowed fate to use the weapons they had already forged. When the dust settled, there was only one woman. The emperor trusted only one woman. The court feared only one woman. The people whispered about, behind their sleeves, me. The day Gaozong named me empress, the palace erupted. Some ministers bowed, some protested, some wept in frustration. A former concubine, a woman with no powerful family, a woman who had once been sent away to a temple, ascending the phoenix throne. I walked through the hall that day with slow, deliberate steps, the weight of my new robes heavy, the air perfumed with incense and barely concealed fury. As I approached the throne, I felt the entire empire watching, and I thought, if I bow now, I will bow forever. So I didn't. I lowered my head just enough to honor the ritual, nothing more. I stood straight, shoulders back, eyes steady. I felt the gaze of the Emperor on me, soft, aching, certain. I felt the gaze of the court on me, sharp, fearful, calculating. And behind them all, I felt the gaze of history itself, waiting, measuring, daring. When the ceremony ended, and I stood beside him as Empress Wu, I let a single breath escape, like the first note of a storm, not out of relief, out of recognition, out of promise, out of inevitability, for I knew, as surely as I knew my own name, that this throne beside him was only the beginning. You, listening now from your modern world, tell me, in your time, when a woman reaches the seat of power, do they celebrate her, or do they fear her? Do they honor her mind, or whisper behind her back? Do they open doors for her, or build new walls? In my world, I tore the walls down, one by one, brick by brick, until there was nothing above me but sky. Power does not arrive with a crown. It arrives in silence, in the way a minister lowers his head before daring to speak, in the way generals shift their weight when you enter a room, in the way the entire palace breathes differently when you raise your eyes. When I became empress, I felt something shift, not suddenly, not like a drumbeat, but like the slow tightening of a bowstring, a tension, a readiness, a direction. The emperor sat on the dragon throne, but the court began to turn toward me, like sunflowers to the sun, not because they loved me, not because they trusted me, but because they understood that to ignore me was to ignore the future, and the future has sharp claws. In those early years as empress, I moved carefully, not timidly, but with a quiet precision of a lioness learning the borders of her territory. I did not roar. I watched. I waited. I listened, because in the palace, listening is the purest form of power. I learned which ministers served the empire, and which served only themselves. I learned which generals could be bargained with, which concubines plotted at night, which clan leaders whispered in shadows, and while others thought me merely observant, I was calculating, not for vengeance, for stability, for survival, for rule. One morning, as pale winter light crawled across the throne room floor, a minister from a powerful clan attempted to test me. He bowed deeply, too deeply, a sign of false respect. Your Majesty, he said, voice sweet as spoiled honey, it is unusual for an empress to involve herself in state matters. Perhaps it would be wise to leave decisions of governance to men of experience. The words were soft, the insult was not. I smiled, not warmly, not cruelly, a simple curve of the lips, the kind that unsettles men because they cannot read it. Experience, I said gently, is measured not in years, but in clarity. He frowned. Clarity, Your Majesty. I stepped down from the throne platform. The hall fell silent. My footsteps echoed like distant thunder. Clarity, I repeated. is knowing when a man hides incompetence behind the mask of tradition. A ripple swept the court, soft, startled breaths, shifting robes, eyes widening. The minister bowed again, this time too quickly, his mask cracking. He never challenged me again, but victories in the palace were not the victories that mattered. The empire beyond the walls was trembling. Taxes were mismanaged. Corruption spread like mold in the granaries of distant provinces. Couriers brought news of famine in the west, of rebellions flaring in the south, of nomads pressing at the borders. The emperor's health, fragile since his youth, began to decline once more, and so the empire turned not by decree, not by ceremony, but by necessity toward me. It began quietly, a question here, a suggestion there, a single report entrusted to me, instead of the ministers, then another, until one evening, when the moon hung low and golden. Over the palace roofs, Gao Zong took my hand and whispered, Jiao, the empire needs you. His voice trembled, not from illness, from the weight of asking. I will stand beside you, I said softly. He exhaled. You may need to stand for both of us. His gaze drifted to the open window, where lanterns flickered in the wind. I am not my father, he said, a confession shaped by sorrow. I am not the ruler he was. I touched his cheek, letting my voice soften. You are the ruler this time needs, and I am the woman you need beside you. He closed his eyes, leaning into my hand. In that moment, our partnership became something deeper than affection or desire or politics. It became purpose, shared, intertwined, indivisible. From that night forward, I stepped fully into the machinery of power, not behind him, not beneath him, beside him. I met with ministers myself. I reviewed edicts before they were announced. I oversaw examinations, ensuring that scholars were chosen for brilliance rather than birth. I sent inspectors to the provinces, breaking corrupt networks that had rotted for decades. I raised men of talent, even those of low birth, because talent is worth more than the dust of ancestry. Some hated me for this, some feared me. Good. Fear is clarity for those who understand nothing else. But power is a landscape that grows lonelier as you climb. I began to feel it in the quiet hours of night, when the emperor slept beside me and the palace lay still. I would rise from the bed, wrap myself in a silk robe, and walk the empty corridors alone. The lanterns cast long shadows against the carved walls. The sound of my footsteps echoed through the stillness. Sometimes I paused before a bronze mirror and saw a version of myself I barely recognized. Not the girl who watered temple gardens, not the concubine who copied scrolls, not the young woman who entered the palace with more questions than answers. No, what I saw was someone both hardened and illuminated by purpose, a lioness draped in silk, carrying the weight of a kingdom on her shoulders and refusing to bend. And yet there was loneliness there, too, a loneliness that no crown could soften. For power is a mountain top, and mountain tops are always cold. One night, as rain whispered against the roof tiles, Gaozong lay awake beside me. You carry too much, he murmured. So do you, I replied. He turned to me, his eyes soft with emotion I rarely saw in him. Do you ever regret this? He asked. The palace, the crown, the life you have built? Regret, a strange word. One I turned over in my mind like a river pebble. No, I said quietly. Regret is for those who wish for smaller lives. He exhaled slowly. I sometimes fear the world will never understand you. I met his gaze. They do not need to understand me, Your Majesty. They only need to follow. His hand tightened around mine, and for a moment, just a moment, the cold of the mountaintop felt less biting. As my influence deepened, enemies multiplied, clans whose ancestors had served emperors for centuries saw me as a threat. Generals murmured behind lacquered screens. Court ladies paid storytellers to weave cruel rumors in the markets. But rumors are wind. I am stone. I answered their fear with reforms, with stability, with truth, with results. When granaries overflowed again, they said it was coincidence. When taxes became fair, they said it was luck. When rebellions ceased, they said it was the generals. But the people knew, and the court knew, and Gaozong knew. I was not simply an empress. I was becoming the architect of an empire. Yet, even as my power grew, a shadow grew with it. Gaozong's health, his headaches worsened, his strength waned. There were days he could not stand without gripping the throne itself. For support, the ministers panicked, the clans conspired. Rumors swirled like smoke above a dying flame. Who would rule when the emperor could no longer rise? They thought they had the answer. A prince, a regent, a council of men. None imagined the truth. None imagined me, and why would they? The world had never seen what was coming. A woman, not only as empress, but as emperor. A woman, not beside the dragon throne, but upon it. A woman who would reshape history with her own hands and leave her name burning brighter than the man who came before her. But that ascent, the final ascent, was still ahead of me, still glowing like a distant dawn, still waiting like fate. You, listening from your own century, tell me, when you climb toward your own power, does the world open its arms, or does it bar the doors and look at you with suspicion? Do they ask, who does she think she is, the way they once asked of me? Do they fear your ambition, your intelligence, your voice? If so, good, then you understand me. Then you understand why I refuse to bow, and why, in the next turning of fate, I would rise higher still to a throne no woman had ever touched. Autumn arrived quietly in the Jade Palace, not with storms, not with morning winds, but with a soft, golden tiredness that settled over the roofs like dust on an unused mirror. The lantern seemed dimmer, the corridors colder, the laughter of concubines thinner, brittle, easily broken, and Gaozong grew smaller, not in body. His robes still fit, his posture remained dignified, but in presence, in strength, in fire, in the vitality that once warmed the halls. Like spring sunlight at night, he slept uneasily, breathing shallow, sometimes waking, gasping, his hands trembling, as though grasping for something just beyond reach. And I watched him fade, slowly, softly, in the way a candle's flame shivers before surrender. One evening, when the chrysanthemums in the garden were beginning to curl around their edges, I sat with him in his private chamber, pouring tea scented with ginseng and lotus root. He raised the cup, but his hand quivered, and the thin line of tea dripped onto his sleeve. He frowned, embarrassed. "My strength leaves me," he whispered. I placed my hand over his. "Strength is not only in the body," I murmured. "You rule through the choices you make, not the blood in your veins." He looked at me with gratitude, but also with resignation. "You will rule," he said softly, "more and more, even if they oppose it, even if they call you unnatural." I smiled faintly. "They already do." "And yet," he said, "they bow." His breath caught. He leaned back, closing his eyes. "Sometimes," he whispered, voice breaking like thin ice, "I wonder what would have become of me had I never brought you back from the temple." I clasped his hand tighter. "You would have ruled alone," I said, "lonely, surrounded by wolves who pretended to be counselors." He opened his eyes again, tired, vulnerable, yet filled with a devotion that pierced me. "And you?" he asked. "What would you have become?" I thought of it briefly. Another life, one without courts, without crowns, without blood on my hands, or the weight of nations pressing against my shoulders. I would have become less, I said quietly, less than what I was meant to be. His lips trembled into the ghost of a smile. "I have always known," he whispered, "that you were meant for something greater than me." And there it was, the truth neither of us had dared to say aloud. He was the bridge, I was the destination. As his illness deepened, the court changed like a living creature. Sensing weakness, ministers sharpened their petitions, each one dripping with strategic implication. Generals became bolder, proposing campaigns they would never have dared just years before. Some even came to me in secret, speaking softly, testing the waters, testing me. Others, however, resisted. A group of senior ministers, men whose families had served emperors long before my name ever existed in palace scrolls, met in hidden rooms, plotting ways to diminish my influence. They spoke of tradition, they spoke of propriety, they spoke of danger, but their true fear was simple. They saw me growing. They saw Gaozong shrinking. They saw the throne between us, and they trembled. One night, as rain whispered against the bamboo screens, I overheard a conversation between two attendants outside my chamber. "If the emperor passes," one said, They will force Her Majesty into seclusion, like the others before her. No, the second replied quickly, fear sharp in her whisper. She is not like the others. She is something else. Still, the first insisted, it is tradition. Tradition. That brittle shield. Men hold up when they fear change. I rose, opened the screen, and stepped into the corridor. Both girls froze. Tradition, I said softly, begins as a choice that one person made once. They bowed deeply, trembling. I walked past them, my bare feet silent on the polished wood, and I thought, if tradition demands my disappearance, then tradition must die before I do. As Gao Zong weakened, I began to take audiences in his name. First a few, then many, then most. Ministers resisted, but resistance only makes the inevitable more visible. One morning, a senior official, gray-haired, authoritative, born from a clan that believed the earth itself owed them obedience, said boldly, Your Majesty, the state cannot be governed through the words of a woman. I lowered my gaze, letting silence stretch like drawn silk. Then I looked up slowly, not with rage, not with outrage, but with the quiet certainty of a woman who understands that history already belongs to her. The state, I replied, cannot be governed through the arrogance of men who have forgotten the meaning of duty. A gasp rippled through the hall. He opened his mouth again, but I cut him off with a single raised hand. Leave. He hesitated. Leave. I repeated. He left. He never returned. Gao Zong watched this gradual shift with a mixture of relief and sorrow. One evening, as we sat together beneath a canopy of falling leaves in the imperial garden, he reached for my hand. Jiao, he said, voice quavering. I fear I am leaving too much for you to carry. You are leaving me everything I was meant to carry. He closed his eyes, a tear escaping down his temple. I cannot protect you after I am gone. I turned to him fully. You do not need to. I will protect myself. He smiled, faintly, proud, hopeful, broken. You will be remembered, he said, long after they forget me. I rested my head lightly against his shoulder. Not because of what I take, I whispered, but because of what I become. The final decline came slowly, like autumn turning toward winter, too gradual to mark, too heavy to ignore. There were days he could not speak, days he could not stand, days when his eyes drifted, as though seeing a world the living do not know. And I sat beside him, held his hand, read to him, listened to the rise and fall of breath that carried decades of our shared life. We had loved quietly, fiercely, in a world that did not grant love the privilege of softness. And when he could no longer speak, he squeezed my hand, as though apologizing for the burden he was leaving me. The day before he died, he opened his eyes one last time. His gaze searched for me, then softened when he found me. Jiao, he whispered. It was barely sound, just breath, just memory. I am not afraid, I said quietly. He smiled. I know. He breathed. You never were. Then just for a heartbeat. Clarity filled his eyes. Strength returned to his voice. Become what you were meant to be. And he let go. His death was not a moment. It was a wave. The palace inhaled. The empire trembled. Ministers ran. Courtiers wept. Clans scrambled. Whispers swirled like ashes in a sudden wind, and I stood alone in the quiet center of that storm. For the first time, the weight of 1,000 years of tradition pressed fully upon me. Empress widows were expected to retire, to vanish, to fade, to pray in silence for the rest of their lives. But I had already outgrown silence. I had already rewritten prayer. And now, with the empire in the hands of weak sons and scheming clans, I saw clearly the path before me, a path no woman had ever walked, a path paved with fear, with defiance, with brilliance, with blood, a path that led not to the side of the dragon throne, but to the throne itself. You listening from centuries away, tell me, in your world, when the moment comes to become who you truly are, do you take it? Even if the world tells you not to, even if history says no, even if everything around you begs you to bow, or do you lift your head, straighten your spine, and step forward into your destiny, as I did, as I would, as the world could no longer stop me from doing. They expected me to vanish, a widow, a relic, a shadow of a former emperor. Tradition said I should shave my hair, withdraw to a quiet monastery, live out my remaining years in prayer and invisibility. Tradition spoke as though it were a law of nature, as though the world would break if a woman refused to bow. But I was no longer a woman shaped by the world. I was a woman who shaped worlds. And so, the morning after Gao Zhong's death, while incense still burned beside his body, while the palace corridors were heavy with the smell of tears and politics, I rose from the widow's mat and walked into the council chamber. The ministers froze. Their faces turned pale, as if they had seen a ghost. Perhaps they had the ghost of every rule they believed unbreakable. Your Majesty, one stammered, recovering quickly. We were not expecting you. Then you have not been paying attention, I said softly, my voice carried, not through volume, but through inevitability. I sat at the head of the council table, in Gao Zong's chair, not beside it, not behind it. In it, a minister stepped forward, trembling with anger. This is improper. Improper, I said, interrupting him with a tilt of my head. Describes much of life, and yet life continues. Laughter rippled, nervous, fearful, unwilling. I folded my hands in my lap. Read the petitions. The minister swallowed hard. Your Majesty, it is customary. I leaned back. When custom serves the empire, we honor it. When it endangers the empire, we rewrite it. Silence, heavy as stone, cold as winter, perfect. The empire was in chaos during the first months of my widowhood. Princes fought like dogs over a fallen carcass, each claiming that heaven favored him. Court ladies whispered fabricated prophecies. Clans sharpened knives behind embroidered screens. Generals marched troops too close to the capital, and the people starved while nobles debated etiquette. I had no patience for etiquette. I had patience only for results. The first prince to challenge me was Li Xian, ambitious, clever in a shallow way, easily flattered, easily misled. He called for a private meeting, disguised as a gesture of concern. Stepmother, he said, bowing deeply, I worry for your well-being. Grief must weigh heavily upon you. I studied him, measured the tremor in his hands, the flicker in his eyes. Say what you came to say, I replied. He hesitated. Then he lifted his chin, attempting courage. The empire is unstable. It needs a strong ruler, a man. I said nothing. Silence is a blade for those who expect applause. Encouraged by my quiet, he continued, the ministers agree that I should take full authority while you retire to a life befitting a dowager empress. He smiled slightly. A mistake. I rose, slowly, deliberately, like a mountain rising from mist. You speak boldly, I said. Boldness is sometimes necessary, he replied. You mistake boldness for ambition, I murmured, and ambition for destiny. He frowned. Your Majesty, do you know, I said gently, what a ruler needs most? He faltered. I stepped closer, so close he could feel my breath. Vision. His eyes widened. Not ego, not lineage, not force. I brushed past him. And certainly not ignorance. That was the last conversation he ever had. As a man who thought he could rule, he was deposed within a month. Evidence was found, real or convenient. It no longer mattered. Of corruption, of conspiracy, of unfitness, he was sent away, not by my anger, but by my certainty. Another prince tried next, then another. Each fell not by my hand, but by their own incompetence. I did not need to crush them. I only needed to reveal them. Power reveals. It exposes. It clarifies. And clarity is fatal to weak men. When the court realized no prince could challenge me, they tried another tactic. Fear. Whispers of assassination. Poison in teacups. Knives hidden in sleeves. One evening, a maid entered my chamber with hands trembling so violently the lantern nearly slipped from her grip. Your Majesty, she whispered, there is danger. There is always danger. I replied. I dismissed her gently, then sat alone in the dim orange glow of candlelight, in silence, listening, breathing, becoming. I had lived among assassins, schemers, vipers, and ghosts for so long that fear had become nothing more than a distant echo, a memory of a language I no longer spoke. If they killed me, so be it. History would still carry my name, but if they failed, the world would belong to me. The final obstacle before the throne was not a man, it was an idea, a belief held for centuries, that a woman could never rule China, not beside an emperor, not behind an emperor, not instead of an emperor. Women were to be advisors, concubines, daughters, mothers, never rulers. I understood then that to rise, I did not need to defeat men. I needed to defeat belief, and belief is much easier to kill than a soldier. It only requires a story, a sign, a moment, a whisper. So I created one, a prophecy, a comet, a celestial omen. Did I invent it? Did I merely highlight what others ignored? Did heaven truly send a sign? Does it matter? History remembers only the version that survives. When the people heard that heaven had shown favor to a woman born of no noble clan, their awe became acceptance. Their acceptance became devotion, and that devotion became a bridge between myself and the throne. Then came the day. No blood, no rebellion, no uprising, just a hall full of ministers kneeling, not because they loved me, not because they trusted me, because they understood China needed a ruler, not a boy, not a puppet, not a weak prince clinging to tradition. It needed me. So, on a morning washed with pale sunlight, the jade seals were placed before me. The imperial banners unfurled. The drums thundered like the heartbeat of the sky, and I stepped forward, not as empress, not as dowager, not as widow, as emperor. My name, I declared, voice ringing through the hall like a blade drawn from its sheath, shall no longer follow the titles of women. I take the mandate of heaven as sovereign of China. The hall erupted, some in shock, some in awe, some in silent terror, but all bowed, and in that bow was the death of 1,000 years of unchallenged tradition and the birth of Wu Zetian, Emperor of Zhou, sole ruler of China, daughter of no dynasty, maker of her own. You, listening now from your distant world, tell me, when the moment comes to choose between the life they assign you and the life you were meant for, which one do you take? Do you bow because it is easier, or do you rise because you must? Do you let history shape you, or do you carve your name into the stone of centuries with your own hands? Ask yourself, then listen to me as I tell you what came next. When I first sat upon the dragon throne, truly sat upon it, not beside it, not behind it, but on it, I expected to feel triumphant. Instead, I felt quiet, quiet in the way the ocean is quiet, just before it swallows a continent, quiet in the way a blade is quiet, until the moment it draws blood. The hall before me was a forest of bowed heads, a sea of silk and trembling voices. Every minister, every general, every scholar waited for my first command, and in that moment I understood something profound. Power does not roar, it listens. Power does not rush, it calculates. Power does not celebrate, it remembers its own price. And so I began my reign, not with fire, not with vengeance, not with spectacle, but with clarity. The empire I inherited, my empire, was fractured. The wealthy grew fatter, while farmers starved. Provincial governors acted like small kings. Corruption rooted itself in every office, like ivy claiming an ancient wall. But I am a gardener of nations. I prune without hesitation. I uproot without apology. The first years of my reign were spent in tireless reform. I expanded the imperial examinations, opening positions of power to men of talent rather than birth. The noble clans hated me for it. Good. They feared losing the privilege they had considered divine. I replaced corrupt ministers, sent inspectors to the farthest provinces, rebuilt granaries, strengthened the borders, and sponsored scholars whose ideas could reshape the future. My rule was not gentle. Gentleness is a luxury for stable eras. My rule was effective, and effectiveness is mercy for millions. But power, when held by a woman, in a world of man, is always interpreted as excess. If a man is strict, he is disciplined. If a woman is strict, she is cruel. If a man roots out corruption, he is just. If a woman does the same, she is monstrous. I learned to stop expecting fairness. I learned to expect results. Still, the rumors poured down like monsoon rain. They say she bathes in blood. They say spirits whisper to her at night. They say she killed her rivals. They say she charmed heaven itself. Let them say, rumor is the poetry of the powerless, and I was far beyond their reach. My generals, too, learned the weight of my expectations. When enemies in the northeast tested our borders, I did not hesitate. I met with my ministers before dawn, standing over maps lit by lantern light, drawing strategies that startled seasoned men. Your Majesty, one general protested, this maneuver is too bold. I lifted my gaze. Boldness builds empires. Caution buries them. He bowed. The campaign succeeded. Just the first of many. Over time, something strange happened. The ministers who once whispered against me began to admire me. The soldiers who had doubted me began to fight harder under my banners. The people began to love me. Their love was not loud. It was quiet, like a deep river in market stalls. They spoke my name with reverence. Old women prayed for my health. Mothers whispered my story to their daughters as proof that heaven does not choose only men. And in the quietest hours of night, when I walked alone through the lantern-lit corridors, I sometimes allowed myself a single fragile breath of pride. But pride is dangerous. It softens the edges needed to roll, and so I let it go. As the years passed, my enemies changed their tactics. They could not defeat me in the court. They could not defeat me in the provinces. They could not defeat me in the hearts of the people. So they aimed for something deeper. They aimed for my sons. I bore several sons, each shaped by palace life, each flawed in ways that reflected the men who surrounded them. Some were weak, some were foolish, some were dangerously ambitious. I tried to raise them well. I tried to raise them wisely. But a palace is not a home. It is a crucible. And my sons grew not into allies, but into weights I carried alone. I deposed 2 princes when their ambitions turned treacherous. I removed them, not as a mother, but as a ruler. Power demands sacrifices. far colder than blood, and each time I signed a decree that broke one of my own children, a piece of me cracked, not enough to shatter, but enough to ache. For the first time in my reign, I understood that power is not simply loneliness, it is loss. In my later years, as the empire reached a stability it had not known in generations, I began to feel the slow, creeping fingers of age. My hair, once black as polished lacquer, turned the color of frost. My hands, once steady enough to copy sutras through candlelight, grew thin and fragile. Climbing the palace steps required a measured breath, and yet my mind sharpened like a blade honed by decades of use. Ministers still knelt before me with awe and terror intertwined. Foreign emissaries bowed deeply, their voices trembling despite their ornate armor. Poets wrote verses comparing me to the sun, the moon, the mountain, the phoenix. I did not believe their flattery, but I understood their fear. The world had never seen someone like me, and would never again. One evening, when autumn returned once more to kiss the jade palace with gold, I stood alone on the balcony, overlooking the capital. Chang'an shimmered beneath me, a living tapestry of lanterns, smoke, laughter, and the eternal rhythm of life. A soft wind brushed my hair. It smelled of ginger, horses, orchids, and river water. It smelled of everything I had shaped and everything that would outlive me. Behind me, the palace was quiet. My attendants had been dismissed. The halls were empty, save for the ghosts of jasmine, sandalwood, and 1,000 whispered decisions. For the first time in decades, I spoke aloud to myself. Have I ruled well? The wind did not answer, so I asked again. In your world, I whispered, when a woman carries a nation, do they remember her kindness, or her strength, her victories, or her defiance, her wisdom, or her refusal to bow? The city breathed, lanterns swayed, and in the hush of the moment I understood. History does not remember women the way it remembers men, unless they force it to. I had forced it, not with charm, not with beauty, not with lineage, with will, with clarity, with the truth of who I was, before the world even learned my name. And now that truth was carved into the bones of China. When my final winter approached, I was no longer frightened. I had lived 3 lives: the girl, the concubine, the emperor. I had risen from smoke, as a phoenix from silence, as a lioness from tradition, as a storm. And when death came for me, it came gently, not as an enemy, not as a punishment, as an equal, a quiet visitor who had waited patiently for the right moment to take my hand. I closed my eyes, not in fear, but with the calm of someone who has shaped the world and now releases it. And in that final breath, I whispered, remember me not as a woman, but as a ruler. Now that you have walked beside me through the rise and fall of my life, tell me, do you think the world I ruled was harsher than the world you live in today? In my time, a woman had to carve her name into stone with her own blood. Tell me, in your country, do women still have to fight to be heard? Or have you built a world where their voices rise without fear? When I lived, we lit our nights with trembling oil lamps. Tell me what lights your darkness now. Screens? Cities? Stars unchanged since the ones I watched from my palace balcony? And when you seek power, or truth, or freedom, do you walk softly, or do you walk like a storm? I have shown you who I was. Now, tell me, who are you becoming? Until we meet again in another story, I leave you with the truth I carved into history. Power belongs to those who dare to rise. Rise, listener, rise, wherever you are in the world tonight.